Okay, so we are entering into our last lesson in trigonometry. Today we're going to be solving word problems. Before we do that, I want you to take a minute and do these 4 do now problems before we get started. So pause the video, do the 4 problems, and then play it again to make sure you've done it correctly. So you are pausing my video at this point right now. We want to find the missing angle, so we're trying to solve for theta. In order to do that, we're going to look at the 2 sides that were given to us, 24 and 30, and we're going to label them all in reference to theta. So 24 is opposite theta and 30 is the hypotenuse. Now we're going to write down that special word that we've been saying over and over again, SOHCAHTOA. And SOHCAHTOA is going to help us figure out which trig function to use. Because we have opposite and the hypotenuse, we're going to say, well, is it sine, cosine, or tangent? We know opposite and hypotenuse goes with so we're going to choose sine. And remember, sine, cosine, tangent could never stand alone. So we're going to say sine of theta is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. Now we want to solve for the angle, so we're trying to solve for theta. We can't solve for theta until the variable is completely by itself. Now remember, we're not able to divide by sine or cosine or tangent by itself. You can divide by it when it's accompanied by an angle, but you can't divide by itself. So how are we going to solve this? We're going to have to multiply by the inverse of sine on both sides. So the signs will cancel, and we're going to have theta is equal to, let's put that inverse first, the inverse of sine times 24 divided by 30. Now, unfortunately, I'm not able to show you this on the calculator, but we've been through this. We went through the lesson the other day. So what you're going to press is you're going to press your second button, sine, and that should make sine to the -1 power on your calculator. And then you're going to type in 24 divided by 30. And remember, the only time we press the second button is when we're trying to find the angle. The only time we're going to be pressing the second button is when we're trying to find the missing angle. And I've asked you to round to the nearest tenth. So we're going to get theta is approximately 53.1 degrees. Okay, let's go on to problem number 2. So now everything's in reference to 34. We know 12.5 is adjacent and x is the hypotenuse. So we're writing down that special word again, SOHCAHTOA. And this time we're going to choose the trig function that pairs the a and the h, the adjacent and the hypotenuse, and that is cosine. Cosine, sine, theta, cosine, sine, tangent, they can never stand alone. They have to be of an angle. So we're going to say cosine 34 is equal to the adjacent 12.5 over the hypotenuse, which is x. Now this time we are not finding an angle. This time we're trying to find the missing side length. So we will not press the second button on our calculator. But before we can go to the calculator, we still have to solve for x. We cannot solve for a variable when it's in a denominator. So the first thing we're going to do is get x out of the denominator. The x's will cancel, and we're going to have x times the cosine of 34 is equal to 12.5. We're still not ready to go to our calculator because we need to get x by itself. How are we going to get x by itself? Divide by cos 34 on both sides. The cosines will cancel, so we will have x is equal to 12.5 divided by the cosine of 34. And this is exactly what you're going to type into your calculator. So you're going to type 12.5 division sign cos 34. So I'll say it again. You're going to type in 12.5 division sign cos 34 and then enter. And once again, you want to round to the nearest tenth, so we will get x is equal to 15.1 units long. And that should be an approximation since we are rounding. Squiggly equal sign means we've rounded. Approximation. Approximately 15.1. All right, let's move on to numbers 3 and 4. If you notice, I said do not use a calculator. So if I'm asking you not to use a calculator, it's going to be based on a 30, 60, 90 or a 45, 45, 90, the triangles we know very well. So we're going to set up a right triangle. We know one angle has to be 60, and because the sum of the angles in a triangle have to add up to 180, we know that last angle is going to be 30. So let's think back to last unit. Opposite the 30 is x, opposite the 60 is x root 3, and opposite the 90 is 2x. Now, we want to find the cosine of 60. So that's going back to SOHCAHTOA. Cosine pairs the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So I'm going to label everything in reference to the 60. I know x is adjacent and 2x is the hypotenuse. So when I come to write my equation, I'm going to say cosine of 60 degrees is equal to the adjacent, which is x, over the hypotenuse, which is 2x. The x's cancel, and we're going to have cosine 60 is not equal to 2. It's going to equal to a half. All right, let's move on to the last do now problem, the tangent of 45. So we're going to make a right triangle once again. One angle is 45, and we know the sum of the angles have to add up to 180, so the last angle also has to be 45. We know in a 45, 45, 90 triangle, opposite the 45s are x, and opposite the 90 is 2x. We're asking for the tangent of 45. Well, tangent is TOA, right? We have SOHCAHTOA. Tangent is TOA, so we want to pair the opposite and the adjacent, and everything's in reference to that 45 degrees. So opposite 45 is x, adjacent to 45 is also x. So we're going to say the tangent of 45 is equal to the opposite x over the adjacent x. Well, x divided by x is 1. So I want you to take a minute and pull out your calculators right now. The first thing you're going to do is press cos 60 and enter. You're going to see that you're going to get 0.5, which is exactly the same value that we got at a half. And then I want you to clear that, and I want you to press tan 45, enter, and you will get 1, which is the same exact value we got by hand, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we are ready to get into our word problems. Before we can get into the word problems, we're going to want to talk about 2 new vocab words, angle of elevation and angle of depression. When we're talking about an angle of elevation, we all know if you're elevating, you're going up. So an angle of elevation is an angle where one ray is looking up, but the other ray coming from the same exact point has to be horizontal. One ray looking up, the other ray has to be horizontal. An angle of depression, we all know if we're feeling depressed, we're feeling down. So an angle of depression is one ray going down. And now here's the biggest misconception. Everybody wants to make the other ray vertical, and that's wrong. Similar to the angle of elevation, the other ray has to be horizontal, also coming from the same exact point. A lot of times I like to think of an angle of depression or an angle of elevation coming from somebody's eyes, like someone's looking up and then they're looking down. It doesn't always have to be from somebody's eye, but that's how I like to consider it. All right, so let's just practice right now naming the angles of elevation and the angles of depressions from each picture. So if we're looking at number 1, we're looking at the angle of elevation. That has to be an angle looking up. So we're going to choose 3 points to name our angle. So we're going to go from B to A to C. That angle right there is an angle looking up. So angle BAC is our angle of elevation. If you wanted to name it angle CAB, that would be perfectly fine also. Okay, angle of depression. An angle of depression is an angle that's looking down. So if we're looking for this angle of depression, I want to name it with 3 points again. We're going to name it with angle DCA. So angle BAC was looking up at whatever's at point C, and angle DCA is looking down at whatever's at point A. So we are at angle DCA as our angle of depression. Okay, next one, our angle of elevation. Again, we want our angle that's looking up. We're going to go from P to S to Q. So angle PSQ is our angle of elevation. And now our angle of depression has to be the angle that's looking down. So looking down, we're going to be looking at angle R to Q to S. That is our angle of depression. And the last one, our angle of elevation is angle NPM, and our angle of depression is angle LMP. All right, let's do some word problems. It says a ladder leaning against the side of a house forms a 65-degree angle with the ground. The foot of the ladder is 8 feet from the house. Find the length of the ladder to the nearest foot. So my biggest suggestion to you all is not to get overly complicated with these diagrams. So we want the ladder is leaning against the side of the house. So obviously I'm going to draw my ground. Here is my house. And I have a ladder leaning against the side of the house. So I'm going to take my ladder, and when we lean a ladder, we don't lean it absolutely perfectly vertical. We always put it on a slant. So there's my house, here is my ladder. It says a ladder leaning against the side of the house forms a 65-degree angle with the ground. So where is this angle going to be? Is my angle going to be angle 1 or angle 2? Well, I'm going to say angle 1. There is my 65-degree angle with the ground. The reason it's angle 1 is because this is where the ladder and the ground meet. Angle 2 would be the angle where the ladder and the house meet. And we don't want that. We want the ladder and the ground. We got to pay attention to every word they're throwing at us. The foot of the ladder is 8 feet from the house. Well, think about it. A foot of the ladder, is that the top of the ladder or is that the bottom of the ladder? The foot of the ladder. The foot of the ladder is going to be the bottom of the ladder, just like your feet are on the bottom of your body, right? The foot of the ladder is the bottom of the ladder. So it's saying from the bottom of the ladder to the house, this segment right here is 8 feet long. Find the length of the ladder. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put X for our ladder. And now we know the house is going to make a right angle with the ground. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to work on my SOHCAHTOA. And we know that 8 is adjacent to 65 and X is the hypotenuse. So we're looking for adjacent and hypotenuse, that is cosine. So we're going to say cosine 65 is equal to 8 over X. When we come to solve this, we're going to multiply by X on both sides to get it out of the denominator. So now we have X times the cosine of 65 is equal to 8. Divide by cosine 65. x is going to equal, oh, I just wrote 65. We want to divide by cosine 65. So in your calculator, you are typing in a division sign, cos 65, and let's round to the nearest foot, which means the nearest whole number, and we will get approximately, let's make that an approximate, approximately 19 feet. All right, Patricia is standing on a pier. She has just tied her canoe to a hook at the end of the pier. If the pier stands 29 feet above sea level and the rope is 52 feet long, what is the measure of the angle formed by the rope and the pier round to the nearest degree? Okay, so we have Patricia sitting on a pier and she has her canoe tied to a rope. So here's my water. Here's my pier. I have to give that pier some height because it's saying that the pier is 29 feet above sea level. So here's our 29 feet. Here's our pier. And now we have Patricia's rope tied to the end of the pier and also tied to her canoe. It says the length of the rope is 52 feet long. So this rope, here's our rope, is 52 feet long. What is the measure of the angle formed by the rope and the pier? So the rope and the pier, well, here's our pier and here's the rope. So the measure by the rope and the pier is right there. That's theta. Remember, the pier is going to make a right angle with the water. So now we want to solve for theta, our unknown angle, and we're going to label everything in reference to theta. We know that 29 is adjacent and 52 is the hypotenuse. So back to SOHCAHTOA. We are going to use A and H, which is cosine. Cosine could never stand alone, so we're going to say cosine theta equals 29 over 52, A over H. Remember, when we're solving for an angle, that's where we press the second button. That's when we want the inverse. So we're going to get cosine theta equals the inverse of cosine times 29 over 52. On your calculators, you're going to press second cos, 29 divided by 52. So theta will equal approximately, we want to round to the nearest degree, which is the nearest whole number. So that's going to be 56 degrees. Okay, next one. When the angle of elevation of the sun is 52 degrees, a tree casts a shadow of 25 feet. Find the height of the tree to the nearest foot. Now, these elevations of the sun problems always confuse students. You're thinking an elevation is coming from the sun. No, it's the elevation of the sun. So it's the angle of elevation of the sun. So if we have the sun's rays reflecting, looking back up, it's basically creating an angle of elevation. So there's our angle of elevation. Oh, let's try this a little bit. Let's try to make this a little bit better. There's our angle of elevation. And they're saying that angle of elevation is 52 degrees. And then we have a tree that's creating the shadow. So the angle of elevation is going back towards the sun. And now, so our shadow, obviously, if this is our tree, the shadow is going to be in front of it. So the saying, the tree casts a 25-foot shadow. So here's our 25-foot shadow. Find the height of the tree. So here's our x, and we know the tree makes a right angle with the ground. So we're going to label everything in reference to our 52 degrees. We know x is opposite 52, and we know 25 is adjacent to 52. So which trig function are we using? So TOA, right? O and H, TOA. So this is going to be tangent 52 is equal to opposite x over adjacent, which is 25. Now we're not solving for an angle, so we are not pressing the second tan. This time we're going to multiply by 25 on both sides. And we are going to get x is equal to 25 times the tangent of 52. So in your calculators, you are pressing 25, multiplication button, tan 52, enter. And you're going to get x is approximately 32